He came here to disappear. A broken veteran, a loyal German shepherd, and a winter that showed no mercy. When the storm closed every road behind him, a cave opened ahead. Not by chance, not by luck. Inside that darkness, he found shelter, food, and something he had lost long ago. Peace. Some places don't save us by accident. They're prepared long before we arrive. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for stories of survival, loyalty, and the unseen guidance that finds us when we need it most. A hard December wind scraped across bare fields, turning the sky the color of old steel and the world into a quiet threat. Rowan Caldwell stood at the edge of the gravel drive with his breath smoking through a short beard that had gone more gray than brown in the last 3 years. He was 43, medium height, built like someone who had once been carved from discipline. Broad shoulders, thick forearms, a chest that still held the memory of push-ups and ruck marches. But the posture betrayed him now. He carried his weight a fraction too forward, as if bracing for an impact that never stopped coming. His face had sharp lines, a square jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of Winter Creek water. Those eyes rarely settled on anything for long. They darted measured distance, assessed exits. It wasn't rudeness. It was training that had seeped into bone, then turned into something darker when a rock ended and the danger didn't. At his left leg, Asher waited without a leash. The German shepherd was 7, still strong, still alert, with a thick sable coat that darkened along his back like ink brushed across fur. A small crescent scar cut through the hair above his right shoulder, the souvenir of a training yard incident years ago. His ears stood tall, his amber eyes steady, and his tail hung low but not tucked. Asher's calm was not softness. It was competence. The dog watched the porch, watched the yard, watched Rowan's hands like a partner who had learned that humans often lied with their mouths but told the truth with their fingers. This was a K9 service dog, trained to detect panic, trained to intervene, trained to save lives without being asked. The farmhouse behind them looked warm in the cruelest way. Smoke rising from the chimney curtains, drawn light pulled tight behind windows. The kind of light that made you believe in forgiveness until you tried to walk into it. The front door opened. Leonard Morrison stepped out first as if he needed the cold to give him courage. Leonard was in his late 50s, a thick-set man with a red face and a neck that seemed to melt into his collar. His hair, once dark, had thinned and turned the color of dirty straw. His hands were big, the hands of a man who had wrestled hay bales and engines in stubborn weather his whole life. But they were clenched now in a way that had nothing to do with work. He didn't look at Rowan at first. He looked past him as if the problem would solve itself if he refused to give it a name. Behind Leonard came Vivian Morrison, early 50s, tall and straight-backed, wrapped in a neat wool coat that belonged in a town, not on a farm. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun that made her cheekbones look sharper. Her face had the careful, controlled expression of someone who practiced being reasonable, someone who could say something cruel and still sound like a person doing the right thing. She held herself like a church pew, upright, polished, unforgiving. Rowan's ex-wife, Evelyn Morrison, did not come outside. He could feel that absence the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Evelyn had been the one who used to step between arguments, the one who would put a hand on his arm and say, "We'll figure it out." But we had died somewhere between Rowan's nightmares and Evelyn's exhaustion. The marriage didn't explode, it starved. And now the house where he had once tried to become a quieter man was closing itself around him like it had never known his name. Leonard cleared his throat. "You got what you need." Rowan looked down at the canvas backpack by his boot. It was old army issue, patched at the seams, carrying the kind of weight that didn't show on the outside. A spare sweater, 2 cans of beans, a roll of duct tape, a metal cup, a small first aid kit with more missing than present, and a folded photograph Rowan kept inside a plastic bag to keep it from dissolving. The rifle, an old hunting gun with worn bluing, leaned against the porch post, where Leonard had set it as if it might stain the house if it stayed inside too long. "I've got it," Rowan said. His voice had changed since the war. It used to be warmer, easier. Now it sounded like gravel under a boot, quiet, controlled, meant for short distances. Rowan hated the sound of himself sometimes. He heard in it the man who had learned to swallow everything that burned. Vivian stepped down onto the porch stairs. "Rowan," she began the way people begin when they've practiced the sentence in their head until it feels holy. "This isn't personal. We've tried. We really have. But it's not working." He almost laughed, and the urge startled him. Humor came to him in the wrong moments now, the way a dying light flickers brightest before it goes out. Not working, like a tractor, like a fence post leaning after a storm, like a man could be repaired if you just tightened the bolts in the right places. "It's my fault," Rowan said, and he meant it, and he didn't. The guilt in him was an old roommate, always awake, always hungry, always rearranging the furniture. "I know." Leonard finally looked at him, eyes narrow with irritation and something like fear. "We can't have incidents." Rowan's stomach tightened. The word hit him like a slap because it was true. There had been incidents. One night, a backfiring truck in town had sent Rowan into the ditch before he even knew he'd moved. Another night, Evelyn had found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, barefoot, holding a knife, staring at the locked back door like it was an enemy. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't even spoken. But the look in his eyes had frightened her anyway. It frightened him, too. He could still remember how Evelyn's face had changed that night, how love had pulled back just an inch to make room for survival, how her hand had trembled when she reached for the knife, how her voice had cracked when she whispered, "Rowan, please, come back to bed." But he hadn't been there, not really. He'd been in a street in Fallujah watching his best friend bleed out while enemy fire kept them pinned, watching himself arrive 3 seconds too late, 3 seconds that stretched into eternity. Asher shifted closer to Rowan's leg. The dog's shoulder brushed his knee, a small weight that anchored him to the present. Rowan's right hand twitched as if it wanted to reach down and touch Asher's fur to feel something real under his palm. Instead, he kept his arms at his sides because he didn't trust what his hands might do when emotions flooded his chest like cold water. Vivian's expression softened into something that looked kind, but Rowan knew better than to confuse softness with mercy. "Evelyn needs peace," she said, "and we need peace too." There it was, the true sentence. Not about safety, not about space, about comfort, about normalcy, about a quiet house with no shadows pacing the hallways at night. Rowan nodded once. He could have begged. He could have promised therapy, medication, church, a new job, anything. But begging required believing that you were worth keeping. And Rowan was not sure he believed that anymore. He stepped toward the porch. Leonard lifted the rifle and held it out like a reluctant handshake. Rowan took it carefully, checking the weight, checking the familiar coldness of metal against his palm. The gun wasn't a threat in his hands. It was a tool. Food if he got desperate. Protection if he had to. A reminder that the world had teeth. Behind Vivian, the screen door creaked again. For a moment, Rowan thought Evelyn would appear. He imagined her brown hair loose her face, tired, her hands twisting in the sleeves of the sweater he used to steal from her because it smelled like home. He imagined her saying his name in that way that made it sound like he was still human. But it wasn't Evelyn. It was Preston Morrison, Evelyn's younger brother, lean and 24, and too young to carry the kind of certainty he wore. Preston's face was narrow, his jaw shadowed with the beginning of a beard that tried hard to look like a man's. He kept his eyes on Asher, not Rowan, and that told Rowan everything. People were often kinder to bugs than to broken men, because dogs didn't remind them of what could happen to anyone. Preston held a cardboard box. Inside were Rowan's things: an old coffee mug with a chipped rim, a folded flannel shirt, a paperback Bible with pages bent at the corners, and a pair of gloves with the fingertips worn thin. "Here," Preston said, voice awkward, "just stuff from the garage." Rowan took the box. The cardboard bowed. He could feel the small humiliations in it stacked like bricks. "Take care," Preston added, and it sounded like a sentence he didn't know how to believe. Rowan nodded again. Words were slippery. The truth lived better in silence. He turned away from the house. Gravel crunched under his boots. The wind pushed at his coat like it wanted to shove him off the land faster. He didn't look back. He told himself that looking back was how you turned longing into a leash. Asher walked at his side, head level, scanning the open field and the tree line beyond. The dog's presence made Rowan's loneliness sharper and gentler, at the same time like a knife that also cut away rot. Rowan had found Asher through a veteran program 2 years earlier. The handler had explained Asher's temperament in practical terms: steady, protective, trained to respond to panic without feeding it. A canine service dog, retired from active duty, but still carrying the discipline of his training. But Rowan had felt something else when Asher first pressed his head against the Rowan's thought. Not pity, not obligation, recognition. The dog had looked at him like he understood that fear didn't always wear a mask. Rowan stopped at the edge of the county road. The land stretched flat, stitched with fences and bare trees, and the sky threatened snow. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called, once harsh and lonely. He set the box down on the ditch bank and adjusted the backpack on his shoulders. The strap dug into an old scar near his collarbone. Pain was useful. It reminded him he still had a body, still had weight on the earth, still had to choose what came next. What came next? That was the problem. Rowan's plan, if you could call it that, was a foggy impulse. Go far enough away that he stopped being anyone's burden. He had once imagined the kind of disappearing that didn't require a note, just a man walking until the world forgot to look for him. But the wind carried the smell of wood smoke from the farmhouse warmth he would never own again. It sparked something bitter and stubborn in him. He thought of a friend from the service, Marcus Cole, who had once told him, half joking, half serious, "If you don't know what to do with yourself, build something. Walls, a table, a routine, anything that says you plan to be here tomorrow." Marcus had not made it home. An IED outside Ramadi had seen to that. The memory of that fact sat in Rowan's chest like a stone that never warmed. Rowan looked down at Asher. "We keep moving," he said softly, as if the words needed to be spoken to exist. "Just far enough." Asher's ears flicked. The dog glanced up, met Rowan's eyes, then looked toward the line of low hills on the horizon, as if he already knew a direction. Rowan swallowed. In his coat pocket, his fingers found the edges of a folded paper he had forgotten was there. He pulled it out. A letter. Creased, smudged, addressed to him in Evelyn's handwriting. He hadn't opened it, not because he didn't want to know what it said, but because part of him believed that reading it would make the ending real. His thumb hovered over the seal. The wind tugged at the paper. Asher sat down beside him, calm as a stone, waiting. Rowan exhaled and the breath trembled. He didn't open the letter. Not yet. But he held it tighter, as if holding it was already a kind of choice. He picked up the box again, shouldered the weight, and stepped onto the road. The cold bit through his gloves. The rifle strap cut across his chest. The sky darkened by degrees. Behind him, the farmhouse remained a warm dot in a cold world. Ahead, the hills waited, and the wind kept pushing, and Asher moved like a quiet vow at his side. Rowan did not know it yet, but this was the last moment he would feel completely cast out. Somewhere beyond those hills, a storm was already gathering, and a cave hidden in stone was already prepared. He and Asher started walking. The storm arrived without ceremony, the kind that did not announce itself with thunder or drama, but simply erased the world, one detail at a time. Snow fell sideways, thin at first, then thicker, until the road behind Rowan dissolved into a pale blur. The horizon vanished. The land became a single unbroken sheet of white, and the sky pressed low like a lid. Rowan adjusted the strap of his backpack, feeling the familiar ache bloom across his shoulders, and forced himself to keep moving. Stopping was dangerous. Thinking too much was worse. Asher trotted a few steps ahead, head low, ears, turning constantly, his dark shape a steady point of reference in a world losing its edges. Rowan had planned to follow the county road south until it intersected with a state highway. From there, he would hitch rides, walk when he had to drift, until drifting felt like purpose. It was a thin plan, but thin plans were easier to carry. Yet within an hour, the road markers vanished under snow. The fence lines blurred. The familiar rhythm of travel broke apart. Rowan slowed, scanning for landmarks, but the storm swallowed everything equally. His training told him to stop, orient, choose deliberately. His instincts, honed by too many moments when hesitation meant death, told him to move while he still could. Asher stopped suddenly and looked back at him. The dog's coat was already dusted, white flakes clinging to the darker fur along his spine. His amber eyes were alert, not anxious, and his body angled slightly to the left, away from where Rowan thought the road should be. Asher took a few steps, paused, looked back again. It was not a command. It was an invitation. Rowan frowned. "That's not the road," he muttered, though the wind tore the words from his mouth before they reached the dog. He hesitated, boots sinking into snow that had already reached his ankles. The cold crept upward, biting through leather and wool. He checked the rifle strap across his chest, the weight reassuring and heavy, then glanced behind him. There was nothing there anymore. No farmhouse, no road, just white and the sound of the storm breathing. Asher whined softly once, then turned and moved again, more decisively this time. Rowan felt irritation flare sharp and sudden. He did not like surrendering control, not to people, not even to a dog he trusted with his life. Control had been the illusion that kept him upright when everything else collapsed. Yet another part of him, the part that remembered waking up in the dark with his heart racing, unable to tell where he was, recognized the feeling creeping in now. Disorientation. The beginning of panic. He forced a slow breath through his nose. Asher was trained. A canine service dog didn't wander without reason. And Asher, unlike Rowan, did not carry the weight of old maps in his head. "All right," Rowan said quietly. "Show me." They left the invisible road and angled toward a shallow rise that barely distinguished itself from the surrounding land. The wind howled louder there, driving needles of ice into Rowan's cheeks, but the ground underfoot changed subtly. Firmer. less churned by drifting snow. Asher moved with confidence, occasionally stopping to sniff at half-buried tufts of grass or the dark smear of a rock breaking through the white. Rowan followed, trusting the dog's body language more than his own fading sense of direction. Minutes stretched. The storm thickened. Snow plastered Rowan's beard, melted against his skin, then refroze. Inside his gloves, the joints stiffened and slowed. He flexed them periodically, counting movements the way he used to count steps on patrol when the world felt too quiet. 1, 2, 3. Asher glanced back every so often, checking distance, checking him. That simple act being checked on loosened something tight in Rowan's chest. A dark shape emerged ahead, indistinct at first, then resolving into a line of low trees crouched against the wind. Cottonwoods, maybe. Their bare branches rattled softly beneath the storm. Trees meant shelter, however imperfect. Rowan felt a surge of relief that startled him with its intensity. Asher led him toward them, weaving between trunks. The wind eased slightly as the trees broke its force. Snow still fell, but here it settled instead of attacking. Rowan leaned against one of the trunks, chest heaving, his lungs burned with cold air. He realized then how close he had come to pushing too far, too fast, driven by a need to put distance between himself and the life he had just been cut loose from. The realization did not comfort him. It frightened him. Survival required patience, and patience had never been his strength. He slid down until he was crouched, one knee in the snow, and set the backpack beside him. Asher circled once, then sat pressing his shoulder into Rowan's thigh. The warmth was immediate, startling. Rowan rested a gloved hand on the dog's neck, fingers sinking into thick fur. Asher's heart beat steadily beneath his palm. Rowan closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the rhythm anchor him. When he opened them again, he noticed movement beyond the trees, a figure barely visible through the snow moving slowly, deliberately. Rowan's muscles tightened instantly. His hand drifted toward the rifle strap without conscious thought. Asher stiffened ears forward but did not growl. The figure came closer, resolving into a man bent slightly against the wind, his outline lean and angular. He wore a long, dark coat, dusted white, a knit cap pulled low over graying hair. As he stepped into the shelter of the trees, Rowan could see him more clearly. Late 60s, maybe? Tall but stooped, with a narrow face weathered by years outdoors. A gray beard framed his mouth, trimmed short, and his eyes were a pale, watery blue that missed very little. He carried a walking stick polished smooth by use, and his movements were careful, economical. "Storm's got teeth today, ye," the man said, voice rough but calm. He stopped a respectful distance away, hands visible. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here." Rowan studied him, measuring tone, posture, the small signs of threat or kindness. The man's shoulders were relaxed. His gaze flicked briefly to Asher, then back to Rowan, assessing but not afraid. "Didn't expect to be out here," Rowan replied. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. The man nodded as if that explained everything. "Name's Elijah Kane," he said. "Most folks call me Elijah." He gestured vaguely with his stick toward the whiteness beyond the trees. "Road disappears about a mile back that way. Gets folks every year. You look like you could use better shelter than these trees." Elijah studied Rowan's face more closely now, eyes narrowing. Recognition flickered there, or something like it. "You're carrying yourself like a man who knows cold nights and worse mornings. Marines, if I'm guessing right. Iraq, maybe? You've got that look." Rowan stiffened. "How?" "I was Gulf War, first one. Recognize the signs. The way you check exits. The way your hand keeps drifting to that rifle. The way you move like the ground might explode under you." He paused, something shifting in his expression. Memory, perhaps. Or grief. "Had a buddy once. Looked at the world the same way you do. Never made it home." The silence stretched heavy with things neither man would say. Asher glanced up at Rowan, then back at Elijah's tail, giving a single cautious wag. Rowan felt his grip on the rifle strap loosen a fraction. "I was heading south," Rowan said. Elijah gave a short, humorless chuckle. "South's wherever the storm lets it be today." He shifted his weight. "There's a line of limestone bluffs about half an hour that way," he said, pointing with his stick in the same direction Asher had chosen earlier. "Old land, full of cuts and hollows. Some places stay warmer than they should. Trappers used to hole up there when the weather turned ugly." He paused, looking at Asher. "Dog led you this way for a reason, I'd wager. Canine isn't he. They know things we don't." Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "You live out here?" he asked. "Close enough," Elijah said. "Cabin a few miles off. Don't worry, I'm not inviting you. Just passing through, checking snares before they vanish under snow." His mouth twitched slightly. Storm like this doesn't care if you're ready or not. Asher stepped forward, sniffed Elijah's boots, then returned to Rowan's side satisfied. Rowan took that as a sign he hadn't known he was waiting for. Thanks, Rowan said. The word felt inadequate, but it was all he had. Elijah nodded once. World's got a way of pushing folks where they need to be, he said. Sometimes it uses weather, sometimes don't, sometimes both. He tipped his cap. Stay alive, son. With that, Elijah turned and disappeared back into the snow. His figure swallowed almost immediately. Rowan stared after him, heart beating faster. The encounter felt unreal, like a message delivered and then erased before questions could be asked. Asher nudged Rowan's leg insistently, then began moving again and angling toward the bluffs Elijah had indicated. Rowan hesitated only a second before following. His original plan, thin as it was, had dissolved completely now. There was no road to return to, no clear destination ahead. Only a direction chosen for him by a dog, a storm, and a stranger who had appeared and vanished like a signpost with a pulse. As they walked, Rowan's thoughts churned. He remembered something a chaplain had once told him overseas after a night that left too many men missing. You don't always get answers, the chaplain had said. Sometimes you get directions instead. Rowan had dismissed it then as gentle nonsense meant for people who still believed the world was orderly. Now, with snow stinging his face and Asher leading him into terrain not marked on any map he owned, the memory pressed back with uncomfortable clarity. The land began to rise. The ground turned rockier beneath the snow. Wind scoured the exposed stone, leaving patches of bare gray that gleamed dully. Rowan's legs burned with effort. His breath rasped. Yet beneath the fatigue, a strange calm settled. He was no longer trying to outrun his life. He was responding to it one step at a time. By the time the first dark smudge of the bluffs appeared through the snowfall, Rowan realized something else had shifted. He was no longer asking where he was going. He was asking how long he could keep going. And that, for now, was enough. Asher stopped at the base of the rise and looked back at him, eyes bright, tail steady. Snow swirled around them, the storm at its fiercest yet, and the world narrowed to stone wind and the steady presence at Rowan's side. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, tightened the straps on his pack, and followed Asher upward, unaware that this unmarked path was carrying him not just away from what he had lost, but towards something prepared long before he arrived. The wind worsened as they climbed, no longer merely pushing, but clawing, ripping sound from the air and replacing it with a constant, furious howl. Snow packed itself into Rowan's collar and beard, melting against his skin before freezing again. A slow burn of cold that sank deep. His legs felt heavy, each step deliberate, measured against breath and balance. Asher moved ahead with growing urgency, no longer trotting, but pulling the path forward with his whole body, head low, shoulders rolling beneath his thick sable coat, as if drawn by something Rowan could not see. The limestone bluffs loomed suddenly out of the storm, rising from the white like the spine of some ancient animal. Their gray faces were scarred with streaks of darker mineral, split by cracks and hollows that the snow could not fully claim. Asher stopped short, lifted his head, and barked once. A sharp, decisive sound that cut through the wind. Then he veered left toward a darker seam in the rock, half hidden by fallen stones. Rowan stumbled the last few steps, boots slipping on wind-polished rock. At first he thought it was just another shallow cut in the cliff, the kind that promised shelter and delivered nothing. But as Asher pushed forward, the darkness widened. The wind's teeth dulled. Sound changed. The roar softened into a distant presence, like a threat locked outside a door. They stepped into the cave. The shift was immediate and unmistakable. The air inside was cold but steady, lacking the savage bite of the storm. Snow swirled briefly at the entrance, then fell straight down and died. Rowan stood just inside, chest heaving, stunned by the quiet. The cave mouth angled away from the wind, its lip formed by a tumble of old boulders that broke the gale's force as naturally as if someone had planned it. Asher shook himself hard, sending snow flying from his coat, then stood alert, ears high, scanning the interior. Rowan slid down against the rock wall, breath rasping, hands trembling as feeling returned in sharp needles. He pressed his forehead to his knees and let the moment pass. He had come here to survive the night. Nothing more. That was the deal he made with himself as his heartbeat slowed. One night, regroup at daylight, move on. But the cave did not feel temporary. It extended deeper than he expected, the floor sloping gently downward, the ceiling high enough that he could stand upright without ducking. The stone beneath his gloves was dry, not dusty, not slick with moisture. Dry. That detail alone eased a knot in his chest he hadn't realized was there. Damp cold killed faster than wind. Dry cold could be managed. Asher padded forward, nails clicking softly, then stopped again and looked back tail level, body relaxed but attentive. Rowan followed, shouldering his pack and adjusting the rifle strap. He took slow steps, letting his eyes adjust. The light from the entrance reached farther than it should have, reflecting off pale stone instead of being swallowed whole. The cave opened gradually, not abruptly, as if easing him inside rather than swallowing him. "This will do," Rowan murmured, more to himself than to Asher. They moved another 20 yards in before Rowan stopped, instinct flaring. The temperature shifted again, subtly warmer. Not warm, but gentler. He exhaled, watching his breath fog the air less thickly. His soldier's mind cataloged details automatically. Wind blocked. Ceiling high enough for smoke to rise. Floor sloped for drainage. Entrance defensible if needed. The cave checked boxes he had not consciously listed. Asher circled once, then lay down, front paws stretched forward, head resting between them. That simple act struck Rowan harder than any calculation. Asher did not lie down unless he believed they were safe enough to stop moving. Rowan removed his gloves and flexed his fingers, wincing as circulation returned. He shrugged off the backpack, set it carefully against the wall, and leaned the rifle beside it. His movements were precise, practiced. Survival had always demanded respect for order, even when life itself felt chaotic. He took out the metal cup and shook the last snow from it. He had no fire yet, no certainty beyond the next few hours, but the cave bought him time. Time was the rarest currency he had left. As he stood there, listening to the storm rage uselessly outside, memory rose uninvited. A night overseas years ago when his unit had taken shelter in a bombed-out structure after an ambush. Someone he could not remember who had laughed shakily and said, "Funny thing about cover, you don't find it, it finds you." At the time, Rowan had dismissed it as stress talking. Now, standing in a cave that seemed to exist precisely where he needed it, the memory carried a different weight. He moved farther in careful scanning for signs of animals. He saw none. No scat, no nesting debris, no sharp scent of something territorial. That absence was as telling as any presence. The cave felt unused, or perhaps respectfully abandoned. The sound came to him then, faint at first, barely more than an idea. Rowan stopped mid-step, Asher's head lifted, ears angling forward. Water. Not dripping, not the hollow plink of moisture seeping through stone, but a low rhythmic movement like breath or the slow turning of pages. Rowan followed the sound deeper, heart beginning to pound for a reason that had nothing to do with fear. The cave widened again, opening into a chamber that made him stop short. The space was vast, far larger than the exterior suggested. The ceiling rose high overhead, its upper reaches lost in shadow, and the walls curved outward like the inside of a cathedral carved by time instead of hands. In the center of the chamber lay a pool of water. Dark and still at first glance, then subtly alive with motion. Light filtered down from somewhere above a narrow shaft that struck the surface and scattered into trembling reflections across the stone. Rowan stood frozen, his throat tight. He approached the water slowly and crouched, setting the rifle aside. He held his breath and leaned closer. The pool was clear, astonishingly so. He could see pale stones at the bottom, darker crevices along the edges, and movement. Small shapes, deliberate, unmistakable. Fish. Real fish. Rowan laughed once, a short, broken sound that echoed and startled him with its volume. He clamped a hand over his mouth, eyes burning, and shook his head in disbelief. He had prepared himself for hunger, for rationing, for the slow grinding math of calories versus cold. He had not prepared himself for abundance hidden beneath the stone. Asher stepped to the water's edge and sniffed tail, giving a cautious wag. He glanced back at Rowan, ears forward as if asking permission. Rowan nodded, still unable to speak. Asher drank briefly, then backed away, disciplined, even in instinct. Rowan dipped his fingers into the pool. The water was cold, but not freezing. Spring-fed, he realized, protected by layers of earth and limestone from the worst of winter's grip. His mind raced, assembling implications faster than he could slow them. Water, food, shelter, all in one place, balanced so precisely it felt staged. He sank back onto his heels and looked around the chamber again. Only now did he notice the high opening in the ceiling, narrow and distant, letting in that steady thread of light and air. A natural chimney, ventilation, smoke escape. Rowan pressed his lips together, emotions swelling dangerously close to the surface. He was not a religious man, not in the way people meant when they spoke easily of faith. War had stripped him of simple answers. But standing there with the storm sealed outside and this improbable refuge opening itself piece by piece, he felt something settle into place. Not certainty, not explanation, direction. Not by accident, he whispered. Asher lay down beside him, flank warm against Rowan's knee, eyes half-lidded but alert. Rowan rested a hand on the dog's neck, fingers curling into thick fur. The contact steadied him, grounded him in the present. He stood and began to move with purpose. He selected a spot partway back toward the entrance where the floor rose slightly, dry and level, close enough to the chamber for access to water, but far enough to stay clear of damp air. He unrolled the canvas tarp from his pack and tested how it might hang against the stone. He imagined stones stacked to block wind, a small hearth laid where smoke would rise naturally. The planning came easily, as if he had been waiting for a place worthy of effort. By the time he finished marking the space with a few placed rocks, exhaustion hit him like a wave. He sank down against the wall, Asher curling up at his side without instruction. Rowan pulled his coat tighter, resting his head back against the cool stone. The cave seemed to breathe around them, ancient and patient. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded letter from Evelyn. His fingers hesitated, then withdrew. Not yet. Whatever words waited inside could wait one more night. Tonight, survival was enough. Outside, the storm screamed and tore at the land. Inside, the cave held. Rowan closed his eyes, not to sleep, not fully, but to rest in the fragile knowledge that, for the first time since he had been told to leave the world, was not pushing him away. It was holding him. Just enough. And he did not yet know how long he would stay, only that this shelter, this perfectly timed refuge, was not merely a pause between disasters. It was a threshold. The chamber revealed itself fully only after time slowed him, after Rowan allowed his breathing to settle into the cave's steady rhythm, and his eyes to accept the dim as a kind of light. He knelt at the edge of the pool with the careful posture of a man who had learned that sudden movement could turn good fortune into danger. The water was clear enough to show its secrets without surrendering them all at once. Pale stones lay like scattered bones on the bottom, and darker pockets along the rim promised depth and concealment. Fish moved in unhurried arcs, their bodies flashing briefly when they crossed the thin column of light that fell from the high fissure above. Asher lay a pace behind Rowan, stretched out on his side with his head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but aware. The set of his shoulders loose in a way Rowan had not seen since before the farmhouse. That posture told Rowan more than any calculation could. The dog did not expect trouble to come from the dark. Rowan dipped the metal cup into the pool and lifted it slowly, watching the water settle. He took a cautious sip, then another, letting the cold spread through him in a clean line. He waited for the metallic bite of minerals, for the sourness of stagnation. It never came. The water tasted like stone, and snow melt, simple and honest. He exhaled and felt something in his chest ease a tension so old he had mistaken it for part of himself. Water changed everything. It meant he could stay without rationing every swallow. It meant he could boil wash plan. It meant tomorrow existed. He set the cup down and rested both hands on his thighs. The silence pressed in, not empty, not dead, but attentive. The cave breathed. He could hear the faint lap of water, the distant hiss of wind sealed behind stone, and beneath it all the sound of Asher's breathing, slow and even. Rowan closed his eyes and bowed his head, not in the posture he had learned as a boy in church, but in the posture of a man acknowledging gravity. He did not ask for rescue. He did not bargain. The words that came were small and unadorned, shaped more by exhaustion than belief. "If this is where I'm meant to stay," he murmured, voice barely lifting from his throat, "let me know." He did not say how. He did not say when. He did not add conditions. When he opened his eyes, nothing dramatic answered him. The light did not brighten. The fish did not leap. The cave did not speak. And yet the quiet felt fuller, as if something had taken note and decided patience was the reply. Asher shifted slightly, turned his head, and looked at Rowan with an expression that was neither concern nor command, just presence. Rowan stood and began to work. He chose a site deliberately now, measuring distance with his steps, angling his body to feel drafts. He marked the place he had selected earlier with 2 stones, then tested the canvas tarp against the wall, experimenting with how it might break the remaining breeze that threaded through the entrance corridor. He imagined a low wall of rock, stacked chest-high, angled to deflect wind rather than fight it. He imagined a hearth placed not for comfort, but for function, where smoke would rise and find the chimney's pull without choking the chamber. His mind moved with a quiet competence that surprised him. Planning did not feel like escape here. It felt like participation. He removed his pack and inventoried what remained. 2 cans of beans, a pouch of rice sealed against moisture, a roll of duct tape, a small coil of cord matches sealed in wax paper, a folding knife sharpened recently, the blade nicked but reliable, the rifle with a handful of cartridges. Enough to start, not enough to waste. He laid the items out neatly on a flat stone the way he had been taught to do in places where disorganization could kill you. Asher watched, ears forward in approval. Rowan gathered dry sticks from near the entrance where wind had stripped them bare and carried them inside. He stacked them carefully, then struck a match and shielded it with his palm until flame caught. The fire built slowly, disciplined, a small triangle of heat that sent smoke curling upward. He watched with a soldier's satisfaction as the smoke thinned and lifted toward the high opening, pulled by an invisible draft. The cave accepted it. The fire settled into a steady burn. Rowan fed it sparingly. He had learned long ago that fire was a conversation, not a conquest. Hunger announced itself once the immediate tasks were done. It came not as desperation, but as a measured ache. Rowan opened one can of beans and warmed it by the fire, stirring with a stick. He ate slowly, sharing a small portion with Asher, who accepted it gently and returned to his place without begging. The discipline they shared felt earned, not imposed. Afterward, Rowan rinsed the cup in the pool and set it upside down on a stone to dry, an old habit that suddenly felt like a promise to the future. As the hours passed, Rowan explored the chamber more thoroughly, careful not to disturb what he did not yet understand. He found a narrow alcove set back from the main space where the floor rose slightly and remained dry even near the pool. He tested the walls with his knuckles, listening to the sound they returned. Solid, old. He imagined a small structure there, walls within walls, a shelter nested inside shelter. The thought did not feel like ambition. It felt like alignment. He returned to the pool and crouched again, studying the fish with the patience he had once reserved for Overwatch. He noted where they gathered, how they moved with the light, how the smallest disturbance sent them scattering. He did not attempt to catch any yet. Tonight was for learning. He watched until patterns began to form in his mind, then leaned back and rubbed his eyes, fatigue washing over him in a heavy wave. Asher rose and padded to his side, pressing his shoulder into Rowan's knee, a quiet claim. Rowan rested his forearm along the dog's back, feeling the warmth through thick fur. The scar above Asher's shoulder brushed his skin, and Rowan smiled faintly at the reminder that survival always left marks. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the folded letter at last. He turned it over in his hands, tracing the creases. He did not open it. Not yet. The cave had given him something he had not known he needed: permission to pause without disappearing. He tucked the letter back into his pocket and leaned against the wall, eyes on the fire. Sleep came in pieces. When it did, it brought no nightmares. He woke once to adjust the fire, once to listen as snow slid and thumped against the blocked wind beyond the entrance. Each time, Asher lifted his head, checked, then settled again. The dog's calm spread through Rowan like warmth from the hearth, slow and persistent. Near morning, though morning was only an idea here, Rowan woke fully and sat up. The light from above had shifted, thin and gray, but steady. The pool reflected it in soft, trembling lines. Rowan felt a quiet conviction take shape, not as a voice, but as a direction. This place was not meant to be rushed. It was not meant to be clung to forever either. It was meant to hold him while he learned how to stand again. He stood and moved to the pool, splashed cold water on his face, and let it run through his fingers. "All right," he said softly, not to the cave and not to God as he understood him, but to the work ahead. Asher rose and stood beside him, tail level, ready. Rowan did not know how long they would stay, only that staying now had a purpose, and leaving would come with its own sign. The days inside the cave developed a rhythm that felt earned rather than forced, each hour finding its place as if the stone itself kept time. Rowan rose with the subtle shift of light from the narrow fissure above the pale beam, sliding across the pool and touching the chamber wall like a quiet hand. He moved carefully, conserving warmth, feeding the fire only what it needed, listening to how the smoke lifted and thinned before disappearing upward. Asher woke when Rowan did not, with urgency but with readiness, stretching his long forelegs and rising in one smooth motion that spoke of a body still young enough to trust itself. The German shepherd's coat had dried and fluffed the dark saddle along his back, rich against the cave's gray, and his eyes steady. Amber tracked Rowan's movements with calm attention. The storm had lessened outside, but winter still held the land in its fist, and Rowan understood that what they built now would decide how long that fist could be endured. He began with structure. Using flat stones pried loose from the cave's edges, he stacked a low wall near the entrance corridor, angling it so the remaining drafts were turned aside rather than blocked outright. He worked slowly, choosing stones by weight and shape, fitting them together with the patience of a man who knew collapse could mean injury or worse. Asher hovered nearby, occasionally nosing a rock into place as if helping mattered, then stepping back to watch. Rowan smiled at that, a small private thing, and continued. By afternoon, the difference was measurable. The air near their chosen living space no longer moved. The fire burned steadier. The cave seemed to settle around them, accepting the change. Fishing came next. Rowan fashioned a crude line from the cord in his pack and a hook from a bent nail he found wedged in a crevice near the pool. Rusted, likely left by someone long gone. He tested the knot twice, then a third time, remembering how often carelessness punished the confident. He did not take more than one fish that first day, lifting it cleanly from the water with practiced calm and dispatching it quickly. The fish was not large, but it was enough, its silver body flashing once in the firelight before becoming food. He cooked it on a flat stone, turning it carefully, sharing with Asher without ceremony. They ate in silence, and the silence did not press on him. It held. As the days passed, Rowan refined his methods. He observed the fish more closely, noting when they fed, where they lingered, how the light affected their movement. He learned to take what he needed and leave the rest undisturbed. Waste felt like a kind of arrogance he could no longer afford. He cached firewood deeper in the cave where it would stay dry, hauling it in sections and stacking it with air gaps to prevent rot. He used the tarp to fashion a more permanent windbreak, securing it with stones and adjusting the angle until it worked with the cave's natural pull rather than against it. Each small success reinforced a truth he had nearly forgotten. Competence bred calm, and calm made room for thought. It was in that space between tasks, between breaths, that the memories began to return unbidden, but no longer violent. On the third night, Rowan woke from sleep with his heart racing, not from a nightmare, but from the absence of one. He lay still, waiting for the familiar images to assault him. The sounds of gunfire, the weight of bodies, the smell of smoke and blood and fear. They did not come. Instead, he remembered a morning in Iraq before the incident that broke him. A sunrise the color of copper. The taste of instant coffee and the quiet competence of men who trusted each other without needing to say it. The memory did not burn. It warmed. Asher shifted closer in the darkness, and Rowan placed a hand on the dog's ribs, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath. "We're okay," Rowan whispered, and meant it. But the calm did not last. On the fifth night, as Rowan dozed near the fire, Asher's head jerked up. The dog's ears snapped forward, his body going rigid in a way that spoke of training and instinct colliding. Rowan was awake instantly, hand moving toward the rifle before his mind fully processed the threat. From somewhere near the entrance came a sound, not wind, not snow sliding from stone. Something heavier, deliberate. The scrape of claws on rock, the wet huff of breath that belonged to something large and alive. Asher rose to his feet, silent now, hackles lifting along his spine. A low growl built in his chest controlled a warning rather than a challenge. Rowan grabbed the rifle and moved toward the entrance corridor, keeping low, keeping quiet. The firelight barely reached this far, and the darkness beyond pressed thick and immediate. The sound came again, closer. A grunt followed by the heavy shuffle of weight redistributing. Then the shape emerged from the blackness, and Rowan's stomach dropped. A grizzly bear, massive and winter-hungry, filled the narrow passage. Its coat was matted and dull, its eyes catching the distant firelight like coins. It moved with the confidence of an apex predator, head swinging side to side, nostrils working the air. The bear had come seeking shelter, or perhaps drawn by the scent of cooked fish. It did not matter. What mattered was that it did not see Rowan and Asher as obstacles. It saw them as inconveniences to be removed. Rowan raised the rifle hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. He did not want to shoot. A gunshot in the enclosed space could deafen them both, and a wounded bear was more dangerous than a healthy one. "Back," Rowan said, voice low and firm, more command than plea. The bear paused, eyes fixing on him. For a moment, Rowan thought it might retreat. Then it huffed a sound like contempt and took another step forward. Asher moved before Rowan could stop him. The dog launched himself toward the bear with a speed that defied his size, barking in sharp, explosive bursts designed to startle and confuse. He did not attack. He positioned himself between the bear and Rowan. Body-angled teeth bared every line of him, screaming defense. The bear reared up on its hind legs, towering in the confined space, and roared. The sound was deafening, a physical force that rattled Rowan's ribs and sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Asher did not flinch. He held his ground, barking, feigning left and right, forcing the bear to track him instead of Rowan. Rowan made a decision. He aimed the rifle at the cave ceiling above the bear and fired. The blast was catastrophic in the enclosed space, a wall of sound that punched through the air and left Rowan's ears ringing. The bullet struck stone and ricocheted, sending chips of limestone flying. The cave itself seemed to roar in response. The bear dropped to all fours, shaking its massive head, disoriented. It took a step back, then another, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Asher pressed the advantage, surging forward, teeth snapping inches from the bear's face. The bear turned and fled, crashing back through the entrance corridor with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. The sound of its retreat echoed for long seconds, then faded into the wind beyond. Rowan lowered the rifle, hands shaking now that the threat had passed. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. Asher stood at the entrance, chest heaving, still staring into the darkness where the bear had vanished. Then he turned and trotted back to Rowan, tail wagging once, as if to say the job was done. Rowan knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, pressing his face into the thick fur. Asher tolerated the embrace with patient dignity, then pulled back and licked Rowan's face once, brief and businesslike. "You saved us," Rowan said, voice rough. "You know that?" Asher sat, ears forward in acknowledgement. Rowan checked the dog for injuries, running his hands over ribs and legs and the old scar on the shoulder. Asher was unharmed, not even winded. The training, the instinct, the sheer courage of the animal had bought them safety without cost. Rowan sat back on his heels and looked toward the chamber where the fire still burned. His hands were steady again. His breathing had calmed. The fear that had gripped him during the confrontation was already fading, replaced by something else. Gratitude. Not just for survival, but for the presence of a partner who did not hesitate when it mattered. He returned to the fire and fed it carefully, building the flames higher than usual. The light pushed back the darkness, and the warmth seeped into his bones. Asher lay beside him, head on paws, eyes half closed but watchful. Rowan did not sleep for the rest of that night. He kept watch, rifle across his knees, listening to the wind and the silence and the steady breathing of the boss who had stood between him and death without being asked. When morning came thin and gray through the fissure above, Rowan felt something new settling into his chest. Not peace, not yet, but the foundation for it. The cave had given him shelter. Asher had given him protection, and together they had faced the wild and won. He stood and stretched, joints popping, and moved to the pool. He splashed water on his face and drank deeply, the cold shocking him fully awake. "We need help," he said to Asher, who sat watching him with patient attention. "We can't do this alone forever." As if in answer, a sound came from the entrance. Not a bear this time, but footsteps. Human. Deliberate. Rowan grabbed the rifle and moved toward the corridor, Asher at his side. A voice called from outside, familiar and rough. "Easy, son. It's Elijah. Heard a gunshot last night. Came to check you hadn't done anything foolish." Rowan exhaled and lowered the rifle. He moved to the entrance and found Elijah Kane standing just inside, brushing snow from his coat. The old man's eyes were sharp, taking in Rowan's tense posture and Asher's alert stance. "Grizzly," Rowan said simply. Elijah nodded as if he had expected as much. "They come sniffing when the weather turns. Smelled your fire, probably." "Smelled food." He glanced at Asher. "Dog looks like he handled himself." "He did more than that," Rowan said. "He saved us." Elijah stepped farther in his gaze, moving past Rowan to the chamber beyond. He saw the fire, the stacked stones, the organized supplies. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of recognition. "You're settling in," Elijah said. "Not just surviving, building." Rowan hesitated, then nodded. Seemed like the right thing to do. Elijah walked to the fire and warmed his hands, his movements careful, economical. He looked older in the firelight, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes were clear. "I carved those letters you found, bud," Elijah said after a long silence. 1992. I was 35 years old and broken in ways I didn't have words for. Rowan sat across from him, Asher settling between them. "Gulf War," Elijah continued. "First one, came home in 91 with a chest full of medals and a head full of ghosts. Nobody knew what to call it then. PTSD wasn't a phrase people used for guys like us. We were just angry or drunk or difficult." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I found this cave by accident, same as you. Storm drove me here, stayed 2 winters, learned how to fish, how to trap, how to sit with silence without wanting to claw out of my own skin." Rowan leaned forward. "What made you leave?" Elijah smiled, a sad thing that did not quite reach his eyes. "Realized I wasn't hiding anymore. I was healing. And once you heal enough, the world starts calling you back. Had to decide if I was going to answer." He looked at Rowan directly. "This cave isn't a grave, son. It's a workshop. God doesn't bring men here to bury them. He brings them here to repair them. But the work is yours to do." Rowan felt the words land like stones in still water, sending ripples he could not control. "I don't know if I believe in that," he said quietly. "God, Providence, any of it." Elijah shrugged. Doesn't matter if you believe. Matters if you're willing to do the work. He stood brushing ash from his hands. I brought you something. He went to the entrance and returned with a canvas sack. Inside were supplies: dried meat flour, salt, bandages, a coil of fishing line, and a small hand axe. You'll need these if you're staying through winter, Elijah said, and you'll need to learn some things. How to set snares, how to read tracks, how to keep that fire burning without choking yourself. Over the next 3 days, Elijah stayed. He taught Rowan how to fashion better fish traps from branches and cord, how to smoke meat over a low fire so it would keep, how to identify which plants near the cave entrance were edible and which would make him sick. He showed him how to bank the fire at night so it would burn slow and safe, and how to stack stones so water would drain away from the sleeping area instead of pooling. Asher followed them both, observing, learning in his own way. The dog seemed to accept Elijah as part of their small pack, though he never strayed far from Rowan's side. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire eating smoked fish and hard bread, Elijah spoke again. There's something else you should know about this place, he said. The cave isn't just shelter. There's gold here, not much but enough to matter. Rowan looked up sharply. Gold, Elijah nodded. 1880s, gold rush era. Miners used these caves to hide their finds from thieves and claim jumpers. Most of it got dug up or lost, but some stayed hidden. I found a stash when I was here. Left it alone. Figured it belonged to the cave, not to me. He pointed towards a section of wall near the alcove Rowan had noticed earlier. Check behind that loose stone. Asher might find it faster than you. Rowan stood and walked to the alcove, Asher trailing behind. He ran his hands over the wall, testing for loose sections. Asher sniffed along the base, then stopped and pawed at a particular spot, whining softly. Rowan knelt and worked his fingers into a gap between stones. One came loose easily, as if it had been placed rather than formed. Behind it was a hollow, and inside the hollow was a metal box, small and corroded, but intact. His heart hammered as he pulled it free and brought it to the firelight. Elijah watched with an expression that was neither excited nor worried, just patient. Rowan opened the box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 6 small gold bars, each stamped with crude markings. A folded paper lay beneath them, brittle with age. Rowan unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was faded but legible. To whoever finds this, my name was James Whitmore. I hid this gold in 1883 to keep it from thieves who killed my partner. If you're reading this, I'm likely dead. Use it well. Build something that lasts. Rowan stared at the note, then at the gold. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear. This is worth a fortune, he said. Elijah shrugged. Worth what you make of it. Money's just metal until you give it purpose. Rowan closed the box and set it aside. His mind was racing, but not with greed, with possibilities, with plans. Before he could speak, Asher's head snapped up. The dog's ears swiveled toward the entrance, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Both men froze. Footsteps, multiple sets, voices low and cautious. Rowan grabbed the rifle and moved toward the corridor, Elijah right behind him with the hand axe. Asher positioned himself at Rowan's left, body tense, ready. A voice called from outside, smooth and educated, the kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms, not caves. Hello in there, my name is Victor Ashford. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk. Rowan exchanged a glance with Elijah. The old man's face had gone hard, his jaw tight. That's a name I know, Elijah muttered. Mining company. Bought up half the land around here in the last 5 years. Not a man who takes no for an answer. Rowan stepped to the entrance but did not show himself. What do you want? He called. Just a conversation, Ashford replied. I've heard you've taken up residence in this cave. Admirable, really. But there's a legal issue we need to discuss. This land is under disputed title. My company has a claim. I'd hate for there to be any unpleasantness. Rowan felt anger flare sharp and hot. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just trying to survive the winter. Of course, Ashford said, his tone conciliatory. But you see, there are regulations, environmental surveys, mining rights. These things matter. I'm willing to be reasonable. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Rowan stepped into view, rifle held low but ready. Ashford stood 20 feet away, flanked by 2 men. One was large and scarred, dressed in working clothes. The other was lean and watchful, with the bearing of someone who had carried a badge once and missed it. Ashford himself was in his early 50s, well-dressed even in the cold, with silver hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. There's nothing to arrange, Rowan said. I'm not on your land. I'm not mining anything. I'm just surviving. Ashford's smile thinned. For now, perhaps, but I've been informed you may have found something of value. Historical artifacts, perhaps. Gold, even. Such things belong to the landowner, legally speaking. Rowan's grip on the rifle tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Ashford sighed as if disappointed. Mr. Caldwell, is it? I've done my research. You're a veteran. Honorable service. I respect that. But you're also a man without a home, without resources. Winter is long. I'm offering you a way out. Cooperate and I'll make sure you're compensated. Resist and I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. Asher growled louder, his lips pulling back to show teeth. The lean man's hand drifted toward his coat, and Rowan raised the rifle just enough to make his point. You should leave, Rowan said. Now. Ashford raised his hands in mock surrender. No need for hostility. I'm a businessman, not a thug, but understand this. I will have what's in that cave, one way or another. Think about my offer. I'll be back in 3 days. He turned and walked away, his men following. Their footsteps crunched through snow until the sound faded into wind. Rowan stood there long after they were gone, heart-pounding fury and fear warring in his chest. Elijah came up beside him. That's trouble, the old man said, the kind that doesn't go away on its own. Rowan nodded slowly. Then we make it go away. He looked down at Asher, who stood rigid, staring into the direction Ashford had gone. We're not running, Rowan said. Not anymore. The town of Helena Springs sat in a valley 15 miles east of the cave, a collection of weathered buildings that looked like they had grown from the land rather than been built upon it. Rowan and Elijah made the journey on foot through thinning snow, Asher ranging ahead, his dark shape moving with purpose through the gray morning light. Rowan carried the metal box wrapped in canvas and tucked inside his pack. The weight of it pressed against his spine with each step, not heavy in pounds, but in implication. 6 gold bars, a dead miner's legacy, a target painted on his back. Elijah walked with the steady pace of a man who had covered this ground 1,000 times, his walking stick, finding purchase on ice and stone without apparent thought. He had said little since they left the cave, but his silence was not empty. It was the silence of a man calculating odds and consequences. They reached the town near noon. Main Street was a strip of asphalt cracked by frost and timelined with buildings that advertised their purposes in faded paint. Hardware, feed, groceries. A diner called the Cottonwood that looked like it had been serving the same menu since Eisenhower. Elijah led them to a brick building at the end of the street, larger than the rest, with a sign that read, Whitmore General Store, in letters that had been recently repainted. The door chimed when they entered, a small brass bell that announced arrivals with old-fashioned courtesy. The interior smelled of wood polish and coffee and the particular mustiness of a place that sold everything from nails to canned peaches. Shelves lined the walls, packed tight with goods that spoke to practical lives. Work gloves and kerosene lamps, rope and batteries. A cooler hummed in the back and a wood stove burned in the corner, radiating heat that made Rowan's cold-numbed face tingle. A woman stood behind the counter, tallying receipts with a pen, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked up when the bell rang, and her face shifted from neutral to warm in the space of a heartbeat. Elijah, she said, setting the pen down. Haven't seen you in a month. Thought maybe the winter had finally gotten you. Well, not yet, Claire, Elijah said, and there was affection in his voice that Rowan had not heard before. Brought someone to meet you. Claire Whitmore was 39, lean in the way of people who worked hard and ate sparingly, with a face that carried both strength and kindness in equal measure. Her eyes were gray sharp, missing nothing as they moved from Elijah to Rowan to Asher, who stood at attention just inside the door. You're the one staying in the cave, she said to Rowan. It was not a question. Rowan nodded, surprised. Word travels, Claire said with a small smile. Small town, man and his dog take up residence in the old limestone caves, people notice. Especially when that man starts buying supplies from my competitors. Elijah chuckled. We need your help, Claire, and we need discretion. Her smile faded, replaced by the expression of someone who understood that serious requests required serious attention. Come to the back. She led them through a door behind the counter into a small office cluttered with ledgers and inventory lists. A coffee pot sat on a hot plate, half full and smelling burnt. She poured 3 cups without asking, handed them out, and sat on the edge of her desk. Tell me. Rowan told her everything. The cave, the gold, the note from James Whitmore, Victor Ashford's visit, and his thinly veiled threats. Claire listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each detail. When Rowan finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup as if it held answers. James Whitmore was my great-great-grandfather, she said finally. Family legend said he struck gold and lost it the same year, 1883. His partner was murdered by claim jumpers. James hid the gold and disappeared. We always assumed he'd been killed too, that the gold was lost forever. She looked up at Rowan, eyes bright with something that might have been tears or fury. You found his legacy, and now Victor Ashford wants to steal it. He said the land is under disputed title, Rowan said, that his company has a claim. Claire's laugh was bitter. Ashford Mining has been trying to take over this valley for 5 years, buying up land, filing claims, pressuring people to sell. He wants to strip mine the whole area, tear it apart for whatever copper or rare earth minerals he can extract. The cave sits on land that's been in federal trust since the 1930s. He has no legal claim, but he has lawyers and money and connections, and he's not above intimidation. Elijah leaned forward. Can we fight him? Maybe, Claire said. If we do this right, the gold is a historical artifact. If we can prove its provenance, tie it to James Whitmore, in the 1880s, it becomes protected under Montana Antiquities Law. Ashford can't touch it. But we need the Montana Historical Society involved, and we need to move fast. She stood and began pulling books from a shelf, flipping through yellowed pages, finding records and photographs. I have documentation, family papers, old mining claims, James's journal. I can prove the connection. But you need to get that gold to the Historical Society in Helena before Ashford can move on you. Once it's in their custody, it's safe. Rowan felt the plan taking shape, solid and achievable. How far is Helena? 40 miles, 2 hours by truck. I can drive you tomorrow morning. Ashford said he'd be back in 3 days, Rowan said. That gives us time. Claire shook her head. Ashford doesn't keep his word. If he thinks you're moving the gold, he'll act sooner. We go tonight, now if possible. She pulled a phone from her pocket and began dialing. I'm calling Dr. Rebecca Oakes at the Historical Society. She's a friend. If anyone can fast-track this, she can. Over the next 2 hours, Claire made the arrangements. Dr. Oakes agreed to meet them that evening to personally receive the gold and begin the authentication process. Claire closed the store early, flipping the sign to closed and locking the door with a finality that suggested she knew what she was risking. They loaded into her truck a battered Ford that started on the third try and ran with a rattle that spoke of hard miles. Asher sat in the back, head out the window, ears streaming in the wind. Rowan rode shotgun, the metal box on his lap, and Elijah sat in the middle, his walking stick braced between his knees. The drive to Helena took them through country that was slowly waking from winter's grip. Snow still clung to the north-facing slopes, but the roads were clear, and the sky held a pale light that promised spring, however distant. Claire drove with the competence of someone who knew every curve and pothole, talking as she went. My family has been in this valley for 5 generations, she said. We've survived droughts and fires and economic collapses. We won't survive Victor Ashford if he gets his way. The mining would poison the water, destroy the land, turn this place into a wasteland. I've been fighting him for 3 years. Legal challenges, environmental reviews, public hearings. He's won most of them. Money talks louder than people. She glanced at Rowan. But this gold, your discovery, it could change everything. If we can prove the cave is historically significant, it could trigger protections for the entire area. Ashford's permits could be revoked. The land could be preserved. Rowan felt the weight of her words settling over him like a cloak. I didn't come here to save anything, he said quietly. I came here to disappear. I know, Claire said, but sometimes God puts us in places for reasons we don't understand until later. You found that gold. You stood up to Ashford. Whether you meant to or not, you've become part of this fight. They arrived in Helena as the sun was setting, the sky turning colors that made the mountains look like they were on fire. The Montana Historical Society building was an imposing structure of stone and glass, modern and ancient, at once designed to hold the weight of history without buckling. Dr. Rebecca Oakes met them at the entrance, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every scam and scheme the world could offer. She ushered them into a secure examination room, locked the door, and put on a pair of white gloves before Rowan even set the box down. Let's see what you've brought me, she said. Rowan opened the box. The gold bars gleamed under the fluorescent lights, unchanged by time, each one stamped with crude markings that spoke of a different era. Dr. Oakes lifted one, carefully turning it in her hands, examining the markings with a jeweler's loupe. She set it down and picked up the note, reading it slowly, her expression shifting from skepticism to wonder. This is authentic, she said finally. 1880s, almost certainly. The markings match known patterns from that period. And if this note is genuine, if this really is from James Whitmore, then you've found something extraordinary. Claire stepped forward, laying out the family documents she had brought. Birth certificates, mining claims, James's journal with its cramped handwriting and fading ink. Dr. Oakes spent an hour reviewing everything, cross-referencing dates and details, making notes in a leather-bound ledger. When she looked up, her face held a satisfaction that was almost fierce. "I can authenticate this," she said. "Full documentation, legal protection, the works. The gold will be accessioned into the state collection. The cave will be registered as a Montana historical site. And Mr. Caldwell, as the finder, you're entitled to a reward. Montana law provides for 15% of assessed value in cases like this. Conservatively, we're looking at $500,000 in gold. Your share would be $75,000. Rowan sat back stunned. "I don't want the money," he said. "I want the cave protected. I want Ashford stopped." Dr. Oakes smiled. "You'll get both. I'll file the paperwork first thing tomorrow. By noon, this gold will be legally untouchable, and Victor Ashford's mining permits will be in jeopardy." She extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. You've given Montana back a piece of its history." They drove back to Helena Springs in the dark, the truck's headlights cutting tunnels through the night. Rowan felt lighter, as if the weight he had been carrying had finally been set down. But the lightness was fragile, and underneath it ran a current of unease. Ashford would not accept defeat quietly. Men like him never did. They reached the town near midnight. Claire dropped them at the edge of Main Street, promising to check in the next day. Rowan and Elijah walked back toward the cave with Asher at their side, the night cold and clear, stars sharp overhead. They were a mile from the cave when Asher stopped, his body going rigid. Rowan's hand went to the rifle. "What is it?" The dog's ears were forward, his nose working the air. Then Rowan smelled it too. Smoke. Not wood smoke from a campfire, but something chemical, acrid. They ran. The cave entrance glowed orange in the darkness. Flames licked at the tarp windbreak, and smoke poured from the opening, thick and black. 3 men stood watching, silhouettes against the fire. Rowan recognized the lean one from Ashford's first visit, Garrett Reeves, the ex-cop. The other 2 were hired muscle, thick-necked and confident. Reeves turned when he heard them coming, his hand moving to his coat. "Too late, Caldwell," he called. "Should have taken Mr. Ashford's offer." "Now you've got nothing." Rage flooded Rowan, hot and immediate. He raised the rifle. "Get away from there." Reeves laughed. "You going to shoot us? All 3 of us. You're 1 man with 1 gun. Do the math." Elijah stepped up beside Rowan, the hand axe loose in his grip. 2 men, Elijah said, "and a dog trained to kill. Your math just got harder." The confidence in Reeves's face flickered. "The fire's already burning," he said. "Even if you shoot us, your precious cave is finished. Might as well walk away." Reeves's hand went inside his coat. Rowan saw the gleam of metal. A gun. "Drop it, Caldwell," Reeves said, "or we put you down right here." The 2 men flanking him drew weapons. 3 guns against 1. Rowan's mind raced. He could fire first, maybe get one of them, but the others would kill him before he could work the bolt. Reeves smiled, sensing the calculation. "Smart man. Now set the rifle down and—" Asher moved. The dog launched himself with a speed that defied physics, 70 pounds of muscle and fury crossing 15 feet in less than a second. He hit Reeves at chest height, jaws locking onto the man's gun arm with trained precision. Reeves screamed. The gun fired wild, the bullet sparking off stone. He went down hard, Asher on top of him, teeth grinding through coat and flesh to bone. The 2 hired men spun toward the dog, raising their weapons. Rowan didn't think. He fired. The first man dropped, clutching his leg. The second hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Rowan worked the bolt and fired again, the round taking the man in the shoulder. Both men were down, screaming, weapons scattered. Reeves thrashed beneath Asher, trying to throw the dog off. Asher held on, growling, his jaws locked in a grip that would not break. Rowan stepped forward, rifle trained on Reeves. "Asher, release." The dog let go instantly, backing away, but staying alert, blood on his muzzle. Reeves clutched his mangled arm, eyes wide with pain and fear. "You're done," Rowan said, "all of you." Then he turned and ran toward the cave entrance, leaving the 3 men writhing in the snow. Elijah appeared, the hand axe raised ready. "They're finished," Rowan said. "Get the fire." Together they fought the flames with nothing but will and water and the refusal to let destruction win. They pulled burning wood away from the walls, stamped out embers, threw flaming debris toward the entrance where the wind could take it. It took an hour. By the time the last flame doused, they were both black with soot, coughing, exhausted. But the cave stood, damaged, scorched, but intact. They stumbled outside. The 3 men were gone, leaving trails of blood in the snow. Asher sat at the entrance unharmed, watching the darkness as if daring them to return. Rowan collapsed against the stone, his chest heaving, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "They could have killed us," he said. But they didn't, Elijah replied. They just wanted to scare us, to make us leave. That means they're afraid, afraid of what we know, afraid of what we can prove. Rowan looked at the ruined entrance, the blackened stone, the scattered ash. We can't stay here tonight, it's not safe. Elijah nodded. My cabin, we'll regroup there. Come morning, we call the police. We file charges. We make this official. They gathered what they could salvage and left the cave behind. Asher led the way through the darkness, his steps sure his presence a constant reassurance. The night was long and cold, but when dawn came, it brought clarity. Rowan called the sheriff from Elijah's cabin, a rotary phone that hung on the kitchen wall like an artifact from another era. He reported the fire, the threats named Garrett Reeves and Victor Ashford. The sheriff, a man named Bowden, with a voice like gravel, listened without interrupting and promised to investigate. By noon, 3 deputies had arrived at the cave, taking photographs, collecting evidence, interviewing Rowan and Elijah. By evening, warrants had been issued. Garrett Reeves was arrested at a motel outside town, still smelling of gasoline and nursing a mangled arm wrapped in bloody bandages. One of the other men turned witness in exchange for leniency, naming Victor Ashford as the one who had ordered the fire, who had paid them to destroy the cave and intimidate Rowan into leaving. The arrest was made at Ashford's office, a glass tower in Billings that overlooked the mountains he had been trying to destroy. Rowan watched it on the news 2 days later, sitting in Elijah's cabin with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The footage showed Ashford in handcuffs, his suit still immaculate, his face a mask of controlled fury. His lawyer walked beside him, already talking to reporters about wrongful prosecution and overreach. But the damage was done. Claire called that evening. Reeves made a deal, she said. Full testimony against Ashford. Admitted everything. The arson, the intimidation, the bribes to county officials. Ashford's going down for real this time. Rowan felt something loosen in his chest. What about the others? The men with Reeves? Charged as accomplices. They're talking too, trying to cut deals. It's a stampede. Everyone's trying to save themselves. The story hit the local news, then the regional papers, then the national wire services. Mining CEO arrested for arson and intimidation. Historical gold discovery. Veteran fights to protect Montana land. The narrative wrote itself, and it was not kind to Victor Ashford. 3 weeks later, his company's permits were revoked. Environmental violations, fraudulent claims, illegal intimidation. The walls came down fast once they started falling. Ashford Mining filed for bankruptcy. Ashford himself faced federal charges that would likely keep him in court for years. And the cave, scorched but standing, was officially registered as a Montana historical site. Protected, preserved, safe. Rowan stood at the entrance on a morning in early March, the air smelling of thaw and new growth. The repairs had taken time, but the cave looked almost as it had before the fire. Better perhaps because now it carried the marks of survival. Claire arrived in her truck bringing supplies for the final stage of the work. She climbed out with a smile that held both satisfaction and exhaustion. Dr. Oakes sent this, she said, handing Rowan an envelope. Your finder's fee, $75,000. She said you earned every penny. Rowan opened the envelope, looked at the check, and folded it carefully. I know what I'm going to do with this, he said. He led her to a section of flat land 100 yards from the cave where the trees opened into a natural clearing and the sun touched the ground most of the day. Here, he said, this is where we build. Over the next 2 months they built. Not a mansion, not a monument, but a cabin. Simple lines, solid construction, built to last. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a common room with a wood stove, and windows that looked toward the mountains. Rowan worked every day, his hands remembering skills he had learned in another life. Elijah helped his experience, turning rough lumber into tight joints and level floors. Claire brought supplies and coordinated with contractors for the work they could not do themselves. And Asher supervised his presence, a constant through the building, as if he understood that this place would matter. They named it Haven's Rest. The sign was carved by hand letters burned into a slab of cedar that hung above the door. Sanctuary for Warriors. The first guest arrived in May. A man named Daniel Cross, 38, Army Iraq veteran, homeless for 2 years. Claire had found him sleeping in his car outside the grocery store, had offered him a meal, had listened to his story. Then she had brought him to Rowan. Daniel stood at the edge of the clearing, looking at the cabin with eyes that did not quite believe what they were seeing. This is for me, he asked. For as long as you need, Rowan said. No rent, no questions, just 2 rules. You work while you're here, chores, repairs, whatever needs doing, and you don't give up. Daniel's throat worked, his eyes filling. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Rowan said. Just come inside. That night, they sat around the table in Haven's Rest, 4 of them now. Rowan, Elijah Clare, and Daniel Cross. They ate simple food, beef stew, and cornbread, and Daniel talked. Not because anyone asked, but because something in the room made it safe to speak. "I've been on the street for 2 years," he said, voice low. "Lost my job, lost my apartment, lost my family. My sister won't talk to me. Says I'm too angry, too broken. Maybe she's right." He looked at Rowan. "Claire told me about you. About the cave, the fire standing up to Ashford. Said you were like me once. Said you found a way through." Rowan set down his fork. "I'm still finding my way," he said. "This place, Haven's Rest, it's not a cure. It's a chance, a space to figure out what comes next." Daniel's eyes were wet. "I don't know if I can. Figure it out, I mean." "You don't have to know," Elijah said. "You just have to start. One day, one task, one reason to get up in the morning." Claire leaned forward. "My great-great-grandfather left gold in that cave. Not for himself, for whoever came after. Rowan found it, used it to build this. Now you're here. That's not accident, that's providence." Daniel looked around the table at the 3 faces watching him with something he hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not judgment, just presence. "What do I have to do?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," Rowan said. "You help me repair the cave entrance. The fire damaged the windbreak. Needs rebuilding. After that, we'll see." Daniel nodded slowly. "I can do that." When he went to bed that night in a room with clean sheets and a door that locked from the inside, he cried. Not from grief this time, but from relief. The weight he had been carrying, the certainty that he was beyond saving, had cracked just enough to let light through. Rowan sat on the porch as the stars came out, Asher at his feet. The dog was older now, gray touching his muzzle, his movements slower. But his eyes were still sharp, and his loyalty had not dimmed. Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter from Evelyn. He had carried it for months unopened, waiting for the right moment. Now he unfolded it and read. Her handwriting was careful, each word chosen with the precision of someone who knows that words can heal or harm. "Rowan, I'm sorry for how things ended. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. But I couldn't save you if you wouldn't save yourself. I hope you find peace. I hope you find a place where the nightmares stop. I will always love the man you were, and I believe that man is still in there, waiting. Evelyn." Rowan read it twice, then folded it and put it back in his pocket. There was pain in the words, but there was also release. She had let him go, not out of cruelty, but out of love. And in doing so, she had freed them both. He looked out at the clearing, at the cabin that stood solid against the night, at the mountains that rose like guardians in the distance. "We did it," he said to Asher. "We built something that lasts." The dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Inside, a light burned in the window, warm and steady. A promise that no one who came here would face the darkness alone. Rowan stood and walked to the edge of the clearing, looking back at the cave entrance, barely visible through the trees. The place that had saved him when nothing else could. The place that had been prepared long before he knew he needed it. He whispered into the night a prayer of gratitude, simple and unadorned. "Thank you." The words were carried away on the wind, up toward the stars that watched without judgment, and Rowan felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt in years. Peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of struggle, but the beginning of meaning. He had been cast out, broken, lost, but he had been found. And in finding himself, he had built a place where others could do the same. The cave had not saved him with miracles. It had saved him with provision, with water and shelter in the quiet persistence of stone. God did not work in thunderbolts and burning bushes alone. Sometimes he worked in caves and buffs in the slow, patient work of healing. Rowan returned to the porch and sat Asher's head resting on his knee. The night was deep and cold, but the cabin behind him held warmth, and tomorrow would bring work, and work was good. A verse came to him unbidden from a Bible he had read years ago. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Rowan had lain down in stone, not grass. He had been led to a pool in darkness, not a sunlit stream. But his soul had been restored just the same, and now with hands that had learned to build instead of destroy, he would restore others. Haven's Rest stood ready. The door was open. The light was on. And somewhere out there, other lost warriors were walking through their own storms, searching for shelter they did not yet know existed. Rowan would be here when they arrived. He and Asher, in the cave that waited in the stone, prepared and patient, holding space for the broken until they learned to stand again. The miracle was not the storm stopping. The miracle was the shelter prepared before the storm ever began. May God bless every soul who hears this story with hope. May those who wander find their way home. May the lost be found and the broken be made whole. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. Like and subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith, loyalty, and the miracles that find us in our darkest hours. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. Especially when you feel lost and alone, remember you are not forgotten. The shelter is already prepared. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.